Good morning, everyone. And thank you, President Pam. I appreciate you. So I just want to welcome everybody to our panel and just thank you, Dr. Stanbeck Stroud, for your keynote. I've heard, I've listened and learned about your framework and I love it. And I love bell hooks. And so just hearing it more and more, just letting it resonate within myself is amazing. And so I wanted to introduce our panelists and refer to our theme, which is addressing racial equity and our focus on anti-racial inequality and our focus on anti-Blackness. And so as we begin, I just also want to thank our president, Dr. Pamela Lester, for leading us to grow and to expand to support our personal growth and the success of our students that attend Mesa. And so I'm just want to take a few minutes to just introduce our panelists, and then I will give some information about how I will moderate, and then I will open it up for discussion. So again, I know you've heard a little bit from Dr. Stanbeck Stroud and the amazing work that she's done over the many years and her experience in higher education, as well as just as an education professional. And so thank you again for being here with us today. We have Dr. Keith Curry. Dr. Curry is the president and CEO of the Compton College and Compton Community College District. He has extensive experience in higher education and is recognized for his work and dedication to his students. I just want to share a few highlights. Again, you can visit the website to read more about all of our panelists today. But I just want to say that in 2017, he received the Distinguished Educator Award. In 2018, he received the Harry Butimer Distinguished Administrator Award. And in 2019, the Community College League of California presented him with the honor of, as one of three, the 2019 champions of equity by the Campaign for College Opportunity and National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials Educational Fund. And so I just wanted to he has many extensive background, but I just wanted to share some of the highlights. So thank you, Dr. Curry, for being here today. We have Takima Mayasa, Dr. Takima Mayasa, who has recently completed her doctoral program. So give her a round of applause. She's a longtime resident of San Diego. She's a professor and chair of Black Studies at Mesa College, and she's a community activist and equity advocate for more than 30 years. And she's committed herself to cultivating knowledge of self as a foundation and necessary key to success for academic excellence, civic responsibility, and life mastery. Then we have Miss Cloris Johnson. She served as a supervisor at the County of San Diego. And while she was there, she was instrumental in the development of the African American Association of County Employees. Shortly after, she was inducted as the chair of outreach. And then while she served as chair, she helped fundraise money to create scholarships to send students to college. The Leo Williams Scholarship is in honor of the first African American to serve on the San Diego County Council and Board of Supervisor. Cloris found that her passion was helping students get through college and wanted her work to contribute to students and staff in a much larger capacity. So after 10 years at the county, she joined Mesa, the Mesa family. She worked with in the president's office, and now she's currently in the instructional office specialist and the co-chair of the Classified Equity Task Force, which her and I get to collaborate on. Hi, Cloris. Then we have Manuel Velez. Manuel is served in various roles as an educator and has published several of his writing pieces. In 1996, he won the Pellicer-Frost Binational Poetry Prize. He currently serves as a Chicano professor and the Academic Senate President at San Diego Mesa College, as well as the South Representative on the Executive Council of the ASCCC. And then we have our esteemed guest, Ahmad Mohammed. He's from Southeast San Diego. He attended Lincoln High School. He did not finish his senior year, but was inspired by many friends and colleagues to go back to school, and he chose Mesa. And he described his great experience at Mesa with many of the professors and students, and he was a part of the graduating class of 2020 from Mesa College and will attend UC Berkeley in the spring. So I just want to welcome all of you and just thank you so much for being here. I just want to share a little bit as we begin the panel that, as you all know, that there's been strange times, right? We're experiencing a health, an economic, and racial pandemic, but we all continue to show up for our students. And so I just want to thank you for being here. So as we engage in this equity work in a variety of ways, we are concerned about some of the things as it relates to COVID, but also structural and systematic racism and how that impacts our collective community. So sometimes the enormity of this situation can feel overwhelming, and our hope is to begin the conversation and take this moment into a movement. The topic of race and racism is affecting all of us, and the diverse group of panelists bring a wealth of experience to share with us today. So as professionals, they demonstrate the critical importance to lead and support initiatives around equity and social justice. So we were honored to have them join us today. And so what we want to do during this panel is ask them to answer questions about the topics of race and equity, discuss approaches in professional spaces, and then share their stories about their personal experiences. So as a panel moderator, I will be sharing the questions that we will engage with. We have a short period of time. So we want to have this rich discussion. So we ask that if you have questions to please put them in the Q&A. But before we source from the Q&A, we'll start with a few questions that we created for the panelists to answer. So let's get to the first question. So are you all ready? So the only protocol, I can't see everything, but I know sometimes we may want to speak at the same time, but I'll do my best to look if you have a raised hand or if you want to prompt me so that I know who wants to speak next. So the first question for our panel is, can you please just take a minute to share what you hope to convey on this panel today?
This is Keith Curry. Okay, this is Keith Curry. I hope to be able to talk a little bit about what we're doing at Compton College regards to anti-Blackness, and also be able to engage and learn from you about what's happening at San Diego Mesa College, and be able to have a rich conversation of how we can improve our system together.
Thank you. Dr. Stanback-Stroud?
Yes. I think that the important message that I would like to convey is that this work will not be for the faint of heart. It is exhausting, and because racism is exhausting. If you understand one of the fundamental purposes of racism, it is designed to distract. And so if you are distracted with trying to prove that you're articulate, or prove that you have intelligence, or prove that you're not lazy. So you're doing, working 4 jobs that proves that you're not lazy, or you're making sure that the family has access to education, and it proves that you value education, and it proves all of these different types of things. While you're doing that, entire systems and structures are either being created or dismantled in order to make sure that you are excluded, marginalized, or are oppressed in many ways. And that is not something that happens serendipitously. It is through intention. It is through design. And it is created in a way that is, structural and systemic, so that then it doesn't have to be necessarily maintained. It will maintain itself. So if anything that I want to, is possible, I'd like to convey that this work will be exhausting. It is exhausting to experience racism. It is exhausting to live within the context. It is exhausting to work around it. It is exhausting to mitigate it. So be prepared for the work that you will have to do. And when it gets a little uncomfortable, then be careful that you're not just focusing on the preservation of yourself, where you're trying to say, oh, wait a minute, it looks like am I being called a racist? Or wait a minute, that's not what I meant, etc. Just my constant words are that it is really not about me, and it's really not about you. And this is hard work.
Thank you so much. Manuel?
Yeah, I'm going to add a little bit to what Dr. Stanback-Stroud said. Definitely, this is going to be an exhausting conversation, an exhausting process. Part of the reason why we refer to these as difficult dialogues is because of what Dr. Stanback-Stroud just mentioned, but also because definitely these topics carry with them a lot of emotional and subjective responses. So I think my message, what I would really want to start off with is, first of all, I want everybody to know that I have a lot of respect for everybody in this particular space. I want you to know that I come into this space fully open, ready to participate in true dialogue. I believe that we are all, as professionals, capable of this dialogue. And again, I want you to know that for me, this is a space of respect where we can have these difficult dialogues, these courageous conversations, so to speak, but that we can still address issues that are definitely in need of being addressed. I think the other thing that I would want to say, and I know this is a little bit tough to say as well, but I think we need to begin this conversation with the understanding and the knowledge that we don't know racism. We may believe that we understand racism, but it is a very, very, very large issue, as Dr. Stanback-Stroud has already mentioned. And we just simply do not have the capabilities or the tools to really understand and deal with racism in the way that it needs to be done. And I think it's necessary that we begin with that idea so that we can begin to understand or to work to understand racism, truly how it works on a systemic level, and not to believe that simply taking a couple of hours of cultural competency is going to be enough.
Thank you. Thank you. So I would like to ask if Cloris, Ahmad, or Takima would like to share what they hope to convey. Cloris, okay.
So I hope that everyone on this call is open to learning from all of the panelists, and also being open to hear our experiences, and that we can, although Mesa College is much further ahead than many places that I've ever been, I hope that this opens up a space where we can have dialogue and discuss these important topics and tough topics, that it results in the best interest of our students.
Thank you. Ahmad, would you like to share?
Yes, the message, thank you. The message I would like to convey today will be from our experiences, especially just coming from a Black student, a Black man, the experiences that I have encountered, not just on campus, but just every day as a Black man, even starting as a young child. So I would like to express that and convey those messages today. So,
Thank you.
Okay, I guess last but certainly not least.
Thank you, Takima.
What I'd like to convey, what I'd like to convey in this conversation that we're having is that this is the beginning of a very important conversation. It's the beginning of something that is very much needed. I'd like to also, I hope that we can begin this conversation with a goal of being very authentic in how we go about addressing this issue, which, as Manuel just said, it is a big issue. But I do believe that we can address this issue successfully. Yes, we have not had the tools in the past. We have not had the will in the past as a community of people, not necessarily here at Mesa, but just in the society at large. And it's going to be important that we are willing to be uncomfortable about a very uncomfortable issue. It's the first step to healing. And I hope everybody can receive that this is about getting to a place of healing. But just like any wound that's happened, when you have a wound, it's going to hurt first, right? And then it scabs, and then the healing can begin. And it takes time. It takes time. So I'm hoping that all of us would be willing to put in the time it's going to take for us as the College of Equity and Excellence to not only say that we are, but in our demonstration. And we do, and we do it in many different kinds of ways. Part of being a leader means doing the work that other people aren't willing to do. And I believe that we're up for the task. and that we can do it successfully, but it will take people to be willing to be their authentic selves. And I'll just end with that.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of your responses, and I just tried to capture some of the themes just about the hard work. I always like to think of Nipsey Hussle and the marathon continues, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint, about the healing and the hard work that it may require of us, but it's possible. So I wanted to transition to the next question, and I would open it up to Manuel first. And the question is, again, oftentimes we can feel overwhelmed about the enormity of the work. So can you talk a little bit about structural racism versus systematic racism and share somewhat of an operating definition as it relates to our discussion today?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really glad that we're beginning with this question, because in a lot of ways, I think the term racism itself is very, very difficult in terms of the definitions. We all have different definitions of that term. So it's good for us to kind of stop and talk about racism and perhaps try to differentiate different, not types of racism, but different ways that we experience racism. So the question of the difference between structural racism and systemic racism, I think I can equate it best if we talk about it from the relationship, let's say, of our students. When a young African-American or a young Chicano student walks onto our campus, they will experience a level of structural racism, meaning that within our campus itself, within the structures and the processes of our campus, there are already elements that benefit white students over students of color. And so our students are going to face those as they come onto our campus. And that'll be the structural racism that they struggle with. But we also have to remember that our students are not coming in as clean slates, right? This isn't their first experience with racism. Our students of color have dealt with racism from their very, very beginning of their life. Those of us who follow CRT or critical race theory know the idea that racism impacts every aspect of a person's life, especially a person of color. So to understand then our students of color when they walk onto our campus is to understand also that they have been impacted by racism from the very beginning of their life, and that there are different structures that they experience and that they go through that also perpetuate that racism. So they may be academic structures, they may be social structures, they may be other structures that exist within communities. But the systemic racism is the idea that within the systems of the United States itself, within the systems of this country, racism or structures exist that hinder people of color and that ultimately benefit whites, and that this is something that people of color deal with constantly. Again, structural racism would be then what we as a college campus, how do we as a campus, how do we as a structure contribute to the racism that our students of colors are experiencing? So I think for me, that's the best way to understand it, right? It's all racism. And I think that's the most important thing. This isn't a different type of racism. It's just how our students are experiencing that racism. And more important, the understanding that our students don't come into campus as a clean slate, that they already come in with a lifetime of experiences with racism.
Thank you. Dr. Stroud?
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that I want to build on that, so thank you, Manuel. I think that is a really clarifying statement. But one of the things I want to build on is that it is not just what that student experiences. It is also, it may be the actual practices you have in the institution that you may or may not recognize is shaped by a racist foundation. So for an example, before the actual requirement, AB 7705 that says, look, you don't get to lock people in these long sequences of basic skills and have them take, years to get 6 years to get through, get to the beginning of a course of a 2-year college degree, where those courses, English and math, are the gateways to the degree. And that gateway to the degree is the currency on which people have economic sustainability and economic and upward mobility. So you have to think about some other ways. And yet we still had policies that we had certain types of placement policies that students had to adhere to. So, you can ask a question. We did a workshop one time and asked the question in the room with representatives from all over the state. What policies do you have in terms of a student taking an assessment test, how long before they can retake it? And we had people in the room from across the state. We had representations that said anywhere from 1 day to 3 years. So that policy that you have in place, while we spend 3 years, by the way, arguing about whether the breakoff score should be a 2.6 or 2.7 in terms of a GPA, because we have this whole false notion of meritocracy, because that was built into also is based on and founded on white supremacy. So that whole policy that you have on placement is an example of something that is part of the systemic racism that the student will experience because it's embedded in our educational institutions. And it is part of the structural racism because it is part of the structure that you use to filter and sort and move students in or block students from getting in the interest or in the name of whether they're prepared or not whether you're prepared or not whether the institution is prepared or not whether the institution has practices that are inhibiting that student from getting there, but indeed it's looking at whether that student has some deficiency. And that policy is designed to make sure you weed out that deficiency and give them all of the remediation they need before they go forward and not have that deficiency anymore. And then we don't take a look at ourselves. That is the discussion of systemic and structural racism together.
Thank you. Dr. Curry?
Yeah, I just think for me, when this question, it makes me think about the history of our institution. Compton College was founded in 1927, and some of the policies that are from this institution, which was majority a white campus in 1927, is different than what it is now. But the problem that we have is that we still have the same policies and procedures that was created 30, 40 years ago, and everyone's afraid to look at them. And one of these that I throw out there to my colleagues in the community college system is that we need to look at all of our policies and procedures from a different lens and look at it from a lens of anti-Blackness and really start to figure out, okay, let's change these policies. And the sad part about this, as an African-American CEO, I have to sit back and look at some of the policies that I'm creating and say, you know what, this might be a racist policy. Let me go back and fix this. And calling myself on a carpet regards to some of these policies. Because sometimes we make these decisions that are short decisions that we know we need to make that are racist decisions that impact Black students. And so we need to recognize when we make those mistakes ourselves and fix it. But let's look at the policies. Let's look at our policies on our campuses. Let's also look at Title V and really go in and fix these policies to make sure we meet the needs of our students. Right now is a perfect time to do that.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to share?
I like to keep.
Okay, so I'll jump in on this. I'm sorry, say again.
No, I was just saying, I like that Keith thought 1927 was 30 or 40 years ago.
COVID-19.
So as it relates to the issue of systemic racism, part of what systemic racism or the calling of anti-Blackness is being able to call it out, right? Calling out the process and the procedures that support white supremacy in a variety of different kinds of ways. And in doing that, what happens is we're able to identify these inequities as it relates to access, opportunity, power and agency, and how those things are inequitable for our students, not just our students, but even when we talk about relationships between faculty and admin and the inequities that occur there, how the treatment that people receive. Several of you have talked about policies and practices that are impaired by institutionalized racism. And I'd like to just say though too, that oftentimes when we talk about meeting or changing these racist policies, often there's there's a denial that we can change them, right? Well, we didn't make that policy. We don't know how it got there. Or there's a lack of immediate change in some instances. There's a persistence of, well, gradual change. Let's do it gradually as opposed to finding ways to have more immediacy about it. And so therefore it continues to be perpetuated. And so I'd like for us to remember that we really do. We have it within us to change these things immediately as they are brought forward to us in a variety of different kinds of ways. I like to also address the human factor. So part of this work in addressing racism, there's a lack oftentimes of putting the human factor first, HFF or HF squared, right? The human factor. And when we look at things like, well, those types of issues are not issues that are that important. We need to make sure that students are being prepared for jobs, things like this. And I think the pandemic that we're experiencing now it's forcing us to look at these issues in ways that people and institutions and structures haven't been willing to do it before. It's forcing us to take and put the human factor first in these various inequities that we're experiencing. And it's making us come together in ways that people have been resistant. And I think we need to talk about that. And well, why has there been this resistance? There was mention earlier about internalized racism and the internalized racism that people of color experience. Manuel, you talked about students come to our campus, they're not with a clean slate, meaning that they have these experiences that they've had. But the institution has a responsibility to be recognizing of all of these different forms of racism that manifest, not just in the society, but within our institution. And then how do we find bridges and connections that will allow us to move forward in the change that is necessary? And that's not necessarily going to be easy work. And oftentimes people say, well, we don't have time. And I would like to just remind us that we have to make time to do that. And we have to put it as a priority, because if we don't do that, then what needs to be done will never happen. And last point on this, and that is that, and I want to use the pandemic because I think I can relate to that. And while there's been this issue of going back to work or not going back to work, or wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, the pandemic and the outcomes of that, not being willing to look at it very seriously, has forced us to think about just the need to go back to norm. And what will the new norm be? And I would ask all of us to consider, to be willing to discover what our new norm is going to be as we have these discussions, and not be afraid to take and develop a new norm, going to the old way, the things that brought us to this place in the beginning. There was a doctor that I saw on CNN who's, I go back to that, when the past brought us to this place. And I would ask us to ask ourselves the same question. And then how do we move forward differently?
Thank you. Dr. Stroud, did you want to share something?
No,
Oh.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Ahmad, I just wanted to ask, before we transition, I wanted to source a couple of questions from the Q&A. And so thank you all for submitting the questions there. I wanted to also just tell you that if you look in there, Dr. Curry did respond to one of the questions from Sakina. And so if you wanted to just take a moment to look at that, but I will come back to that and we'll transition to a question from there for the panel. But before we do, I just wanted to ask Ahmad if he was open to sharing about his experience with structural or systematic racism as a student. And so I just wanted to hear from him.
Well, as far as when I look at structural and systemic racism, it's something, because even as a student at predominantly Black high schools and middle schools and elementaries, it was something, because we could just, I didn't notice it at that time. I know I'm going into like, the whole, time when I was a child, but like, that's what it brings me back to, because, that's where I started as a student. Right. So, just seeing like the things that they taught us while we were in class. It didn't have no type of connection to us. I really wasn't interested in some of the subject matter that was that they were teaching us. And so when I went to college, it was something that that I was learning about some of the history that we didn't learn during high school and all of those things, right? But still, when you walk around the campus, when you look at who's on campus, and sometimes even those that's in your class, they don't necessarily look like you, right? And so when I was in high school or whatever, in middle school, they didn't prep us to go to college, right? It wasn't nobody reaching out to us, trying to tell us to go to college, go to a city college, go to Mesa College. They didn't reach out to us. And I think that's very important, because they do have those courses where we can learn something about ourselves. And just like Miss Mayasa talks about the knowledge of self, and a lot of us on these college campuses need that knowledge of self. When I talk to other Black students, some don't even know that we have courses on Black history. We don't have things that's from the Black perspective, and those things aren't being pushed, right? So it's something that's going on, right? Because it's like it's not really a priority. It feels like it's not a priority for them to talk to push Black studies to Black students. So that's my experience as a Black student and things that I have seen.
Thank you. I apologize for pronouncing your name wrong. Can you say it for me?
Yes, it's Ahmed.
Ahmed. I'm sorry, Janae.
It's okay.
Okay. I really appreciate you sharing that, and it made me think of Cloris in something that she shared with me, and it connects very well with what you're saying. And so I wanted to ask her if she would open to share also her experience too.
Of course. Let's see, 1 second. So K through 12, I'm from Southeast San Diego as well. And I went to a predominantly white school from pretty much my whole life, from elementary school, middle school, high school. And I remember nobody ever said anything to me about college. I don't know what was happening, but nobody ever mentioned college to me while I was there. And so I also became a teenage mom while I was there. And I remember them saying, well, I know a school that's going to be great for you. It's a continuation school. And when they mentioned the school, I was thinking to myself, I think somebody got stabbed there. That's where you want me to go. And so I chose a school that was close to my home. And I will say that I couldn't believe the love that I got at that school. It was very different. The 10 years that I spent up north did not compare to what I had at home. And it was really mind-boggling to me of what was happening. And so I remember them asking me, saying, oh, go to the Career Center. I said, well, what happens in the Career Center? And they were preparing at this school, they were preparing the kids. They had deadlines to apply for college. A lot of my friends were going to HBCUs. However, when you looked at my transcripts, I didn't have it. I was able to graduate, but nobody ever looked beyond college. Nobody talked beyond college. Beyond high school, my apologies. So I had a lot of support from my parents, but both of my parents were born in the 1930s. So they were a lot older than me. They did well for themselves, but they didn't really need a college education at that time to be able to make it. So they weren't able to guide me in this sense. They could guide me in a lot of places, but the education system wasn't one of them. And so I will say that I had a stigma was in the Black and the white community. When you're a teenage mom, there was a stigma on both ends. And so there was another situation where I ended up going to the community college that most of the kids in my neighborhood went to. And while I was there, I was on every program. I had a child, so I qualified for every program. So although I never worked in student services, I could tell you every program is student services because I was that. And so while I qualified for everything, part of what we had to do is we had to see a counselor. So I'm seeing a counselor every semester. And they're just letting me just wander around. And I really didn't know how to ask. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. I really had no idea. And so I can remember being there for some time. And finally I met this one counselor, and I want to say it was probably EOPS. And she goes, "What are your plans? You know, what are you going to do?" And so we had a good conversation about where I was going in life. And I actually had somebody that believed in me and someone that was going to get me there. And so I remember that semester, she said, "Go ahead." She said, "You have enough units to be able to graduate." And that semester, I became an inpatient in the hospital. But because she believed in me and she supported me, and now I had a path, I had somebody to guide me. My first degree was out of a hospital room. I took an incomplete and they would give me a home pass so I can go ahead and take my my finals. They weren't able to bring the finals home. And so I want to say that with someone believing in you and, you know, providing a pathway for you, you can do anything. And that's what I found. And with that stigma, there were a lot of things that people saying, "No, you can't do this. You can't be that. You can't." And although my mom was like, "You know, you can do anything," she couldn't guide me in certain areas that I needed. So I feel like we had all these supports, but I just think about who I met with, and nobody said anything. Nobody had it. Nobody cared enough to say that you have probably enough units to get a bachelor's degree. So I look at it that woman didn't only change me because she cared about me, just changed me. She changed me for generations. She didn't just change it for me, she changed it for my kids as well. And so I'm supposed to be the statistic, the 17-year-old teenage mom. And because of her, she ignited something in me to where now I have an associate's degree in criminal justice. I have a bachelor's degree in business administration. I have a paralegal certification from USD. I have a master's in educational leadership, and I'm in the second phase of opening my own business. That son that was supposed to be a statistic of this 17-year-old mom, he graduated from one of the highest schools. He is bilingual. He went to Grand Canyon University. He has a bachelor's in business administration. So what I want to say to everybody on this call, every educator, I don't care if you're a classified professional, you have the power. You have the power to change students for generations. And so me being on this campus and everywhere in life, this is just who I am. I am the person that I needed when I was younger. I'm always going to be here to support students. I'm always going to be here to support my colleagues. I'm here to support my friends any way that I can, because I understand the power in having somebody, just having somebody believe in you and guide you and make sure that you can get to that place. So that is my part to this panel, and thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much. And I just appreciate all the answers. We talked a little bit about structural versus systematic racism, and then we heard the different perspectives from individual, institutional, and even structural experiences. And so I know that as we transition, I did want to mention a question from the Q&A. But before I do, I just also want to say that if you have an opportunity to go in the Q&A, some of our panelists have answered the questions directly in the Q&A, but there is one particular question that I thought I would share with the panel, even though we have set questions. And so I will just mention this one question to the panel. And it's from Aaron Evans, and it says, how do we go about addressing institutionalized racism as a community college district without reinforcing capitalistic structures that support and perpetuate anti-Black racism? That's a good question.
Yeah, I actually asked that person to tell me more about that question, because I'm trying to understand the nuance, I'm trying to understand the substance of the question.
So thank you. So Aaron, if you would be able to add more to the question. And then so while I wait for her to respond, I will just go on to the next question that we have as set. But again, thank you.
Can I take a shot at that?
Go ahead.
Janae, can I make a comment on that? I'd like
Yes.
to make a comment on that.
Okay.
I think what's being asked is, how do we achieve the change that we're looking for if the systems and structures that produced it, and I believe this is what I was mentioning before, if the systems and structures that have been in place that produced the inequities in the first place, how do we make sure that they change? How do we make sure that they change? And again, part of that first step is calling it out. Where is it that these systems of colonialistic thought practice and these other things exist? Once we've identified them, then how do we move to a place or a space of authenticity, allows us to work collectively to make that change, even in the midst of growing pains, right? And this is a conversation that, of course, we're going to have more enduringly, but I think the really answer is we can't be afraid to just do it. And there are some people who are going to be afraid to want to do it. And there's a lot of xenophobia around change. And so we have to acknowledge the xenophobia around being willing to change, and then create bridges and places and spaces where we can continue to be authentic about what needs to change. And I want to make one other point. We have to be willing to acknowledge that that it's not a one size fits all, right? Because we say, well, follow this path or follow that path. Different students need different things, and we have to be willing to provide those options on equitable terms and not marginalize or have disciplines like Black studies, Chicano studies, ethnic studies be add-ons, optional, as opposed to being a part of the mainstream, so that they work for the students who need them. And I want to say one other thing. Black studies, Chicano studies, and ethnic studies programming are for everybody, not just for those populations.
And I'd like to add to that, Janae, if that's okay.
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you for the clarification of the question. I also want to say that there are a number of things that I think are important. One, we have to give it the respect that it deserves, and we have to be willing to get smart about the different issues. So for an example, if we're trying to figure out how to deconstruct our institutions and dismantle structures that are that have the impact of anti-Blackness or have a racist impact, then we have to be willing to interrogate ourselves. We have to be willing to confront ourselves around those things. We have to make ourselves smart about, under the foundations of it. We have to be willing to have the uncomfortable conversations. We have to be willing to be bold and courageous, and to, quite frankly, have perspectives that may not make you the most popular person in the institution. I commonly would talk to my leadership team and say, while I want to be liked by everyone, I want to, have people say great things about me because they like me. The reality is that I am willing to understand the conviction, my conviction. I'm willing to understand my purpose and my cause, and I'm willing to take those positions, even if it's uncomfortable. Even if it's in a time of controversy and inconvenience, I am willing to take those stands. So I think that that's one of the important things. I think we have to do actually some kind of systemic analysis, just like we would do any other process that we look at. We have to be willing to systemically analyze our practices, our procedures, our policies, etc. We have to be able to pull and ask the right questions, pull the right data. And when I am hiring people, for an example, And I hear people come in and they've got a commitment to diversity, and they'll talk about all of the work they've done and all the diverse populations they work with. And then especially if the population was a almost a homogenous population of people of color, they say it was very, very diverse, when actually that actually is not very diverse. So I've listened to lots of different things, and then I can say, well, tell me what's the percentage of the students who basically get out of your classes and successfully? Well, I haven't, they'll say, well, about 80% of the students get out. Well, yeah, but disaggregate that by race. You've been teaching for, 15 years. You've been a part-time faculty member for 20 years. That's commonly some of the narrative that I get. And they say, well, I haven't really looked at it that way. So that means we haven't taken the opportunity to ask the right questions and get the data. So we should be disaggregating that information by race, and then making some decisions and making some hard decisions, and not having what I call the luxury of time and the luxury of privilege, quite frankly, to take 2 and 3 and 4 semesters in order to make a decision that will impact the student's life and impact their ability to be able to get out of that institution.
Thank you. So I have a question for the panel, and that question is, how do you interrogate your own biases about race and racism?
Janae, I can start with that one.
Okay.
For me, that takes me to the term intersectionality. And again, that's a term that comes through critical race theory. And it is the idea that each of us have these competing identities that intersect with each other. And I think it's important for us to recognize that those intersectionalities exist within the self as well. So I am Chicano, and as a Chicano, I definitely experience discrimination and prejudice. But I'm also male, I'm cis male. And as a cis male, that brings me privilege also over people who are not cis male. And so part of my process then is to recognize that moment of intersectionality is a real moment. And it may be complicated and it may make things more complex, but I need to recognize that I am not simply the oppressed, that I do, because of my intersectionality, play the role of oppressor and maybe even perpetuate those roles if I'm not careful, if I'm not actively aware of that intersectionality. So again, for me, it goes back to that idea. I have competing identities, and those identities create different power dynamics, if you will, with the people with whom I relate.
And Manuel, if I could just piggyback off what you just said, for me, I totally agree with what you said, but I add on to it as a college president. I'm in a position of power where I can be able to make change for my institution. So I have to recognize the role that I currently play and how individuals could feel oppressed based off of decisions that I'm making, and making sure our voices are being heard. And so what I try to do is I try to listen as much as possible before making decisions, and really try to understand the data, but also make myself feel uncomfortable, because as a college president, there's some times where I have to be uncomfortable and understand the decisions I'm making are on the wrong side of things. And I need to listen to my faculty and to my staff. And so for me being uncomfortable, I feel I'm a better leader when I'm uncomfortable, because that takes the title away. I'm thinking about what's best for my organization.
Well, I want to be like Keith when I grow up, but I just have to tell you that I may not be that magnanimous because I think he's absolutely right. One of the things that I really do work very hard on is, first of all, self-reflection and paying attention to what my part is in it. And, I came up in the segregated South. I was raised in poverty, though it was the kind of poverty that the grown-ups knew we were poor, but the children didn't know. And at the same time, while I had friends at school who didn't know where their lunch was coming from, I knew where mine was coming from. So I have all of these kind of different experiences, and as you mentioned, kind of intersections in identity. I am a very privileged African-American woman that has a successful tenure in higher education, retired well, and don't have to subtotal the receipt like my mother did in order to see how much of the groceries cost so far. So I recognize that I enjoy some privileges, but I also recognize when I walk out this door, or sometimes even when I stay in this door, as the lady who came to my door and knocked on when we bought our house, and the lady knocked on the door and said, you know, who's going to be living here? And I said, I live here. And she said, no, no, no. I mean, like, who's going to be living here? Because we were just moving in, and she thought I was the help, right? And I said, yeah, I will be living here. So I don't even have to walk out the door. It comes to my door. And so part of what I try to do is I try to have some consciousness around that. I try to check my defensiveness, because we all want to protect ourselves and take care of ourselves. But, you know, the reality is sometimes I just have to put the pack down and listen. So I try to listen. I try to have self-reflection around that. I try to figure out what's my part in this, because, you know, even though I want to think that I'm perfect around some things, I'm not. I was telling the leadership team that I had a situation where I had the opportunity to be on NPR and talk about some things around student success. And, you know, to be honest, I am easily starstruck. I mean, just, you know, it don't matter who's in front of me. I am easily starstruck. I'm that person that wants to take the selfie and stuff. However, I was really excited about being in the room with Michael Krasny, right? Just, you know, everybody else was preparing and listening to the questions that he was asking on the panel. I was just, you know, excited about being in the room with him. And, you know, he asked a question, and I did my little humble ability to try to answer it. And I recognized that this was a national audience. And after I got off of air, and I went back to my institution, I got an email from someone from, you know, Northeast states. I want to say Maine, or, you know, one of the Northern Eastern states. And I said something about we target students. And he said, would you demilitarize your language? Because there are students, we have students who have real targets on their back, who will be killed because of who they are or what they look like. And, you know, when I first read the email, I was like, oh, you know, come on. But then I realized that I was just simply being defensive. And I needed to look and think about what he said. And then I made it my business, not only to think about what he said, but to change it, and to change it in the institution, and then look further on how we demilitarize our language. So if you look at your students, for an example, if you see yourselves as, you know, we're the one in the trenches, you see yourself at war. And then that means that you see your students as combatants. If you're looking at, you know, landmines, you're seeing yourself at war. And I can just go through a lot of the language that we use in institutions of higher education that juxtapose us compared to the students, and put the students in a battle for their lives. So that's one of the things that I try to do, is I just try to get smarter about things. And when I get the criticism, use that criticism constructively, you know, even though it might hurt a little.
Wow, thank you. Demilitarize the language. Thank you. I would like to just ask if anyone else in the
Okay,
panel.
so I'd like to, yes, I'd like to say something. First, we'd have to take, I think, and I'll take ownership of this. First, one has to take and know that we all have biases. You can't live in America. Jane Elliott says you can't live in America, grow up in America, and not have some type of racism that's been imprinted upon you. And we all have internalized racism that we experience as a result of that cultural dynamic that is true. People who come to America all the time and become changed by becoming American. And Americanism is associated with being white. And so we have to know that that's true. When people go around the world, my mother traveled around the world, and she would often say that, you know, people would just know that she was American by how she talked. She talked very proper, you know what I'm saying? And so there's an association that Americanism is associated with talking a certain kind of way, being a certain kind of way. And part of the bias is I have to check myself all the time. Why am I doing this? Am I doing these things because someone told me I should be doing these things? Or is this something that I really want to do? Is it something that fits within me? I've had, in my years of being an educator, people who say, hi, Takima, you know, I really love your costume. You know what I mean? When I'm walking across the parking lot, and I have to check myself and say, well, okay, where was that coming from, right? And it wasn't meant to be something offensive, but it's just, that gets back to what Dr. Stroud said, is it's the language, right? What's language are we using to communicate what we're trying to authentically be and do? And I want to also say another thing, and that's about self-love. And Ahmed talked about this. And one of the things that we talk about in Black Studies continuously is we live in a society that teaches us to love outside of ourselves instead of having self-love. And part of self-love means I have to know, and this is something I did in the DL, what's the hardest math to master, right? How to count your blessings, and who's the person that you're going to know longest in your life, and that's yourself. And how do I come to a place of loving myself just the way I am when we live in a society that will make every other kind of color contacts except for dark brown, right? That says something. And so being able to come to that place where not only I love myself, but when we talk about dealing with anti-Blackness, can we see ourselves in other people, whether we're by ethnicity, by gender, by sexual affiliation? Can I see my humanity? And this gets back to what I was saying before about the human factor first. Can I see my humanity in other people and come from that place first and acknowledge that I'm a human being that has equal rights and opportunities that I should take and tap into as well. And that's going to take work. And that's what self-love and affective learning is all about. And this is why knowledge of self, cultural knowledge of self, and that other people need to have appreciation, right? And not tolerance. Because we live in a society that says we should tolerate other people instead of appreciating them authentically.
So before anyone else responds, I just want to say that we're getting close to the end of our time. We have about 7 minutes. And so I'm going to put a wrap-up question out there, but I would ask that when Ahmed speaks, if he could just weave in some of what his experience was at Mesa that allowed him to be successful. So I'm going to throw this final question out there. And then if I didn't get a chance to ask him this personally, it was in the Q&A, and he can also respond there as well. But if he would be so kind to just share a little bit about what helped him at Mesa. And then I share this with the full panel and Cloris as well. So over the next few months, as we continue to deal with the health, economic, and racial pandemic, what will it look like for Mesa to have interrogated their own structures about racism? What will it look like? What will that look like? Or what will we discover 6 months from now, a year from now? And what can we do to help us collectively? So what would that look like for us? What do you think that would look like for us?
I'll start that off if you like. I think that it would be revealed in a number of different ways. I think that the discussions that go on in the meetings would be specifically about analyzing your processes for anti-Black racism, analyzing your processes for structures that inhibit students' ability to be able to succeed. I think the minutes of the different meetings, whether it's the planning meeting, the Senate meetings, the college council, the governance council, whatever, those minutes will reflect some intentional discussions on that. And it won't just be discussions where everybody kind of showed up and did some stream of consciousness, but it shows some specific initiative that is guided and led and structured and formalized as the college goes through with a specific goal of dismantling any anti-racist structures. So any racist structures. So that's one thing that it would look like. I think there will be some changes in policies that will definitely go through your governance process as well. I think your educational policies committee or whatever the structure is of your governments will start to see changes in those policies. I think that the constituent groups will take positions on those things and be contributing ideas about how to make those changes. I think that people throughout the institution that work at the desk, in the office, in the halls, wherever they are serving students or teaching students, will be given their very specific ideas about what needs to happen or what needs to change. There will be things on your website and a place where people can deposit ideas in order for the people who have the ability to dispose of those ideas in different places. There'll be a mechanism for that open and ongoing conversation, and whether it's through suggestion box on your website or, you know, whatever that might be. It will be a change in, you know, it's a possibility of your goals that you have. It'll be a change. There'll be changes in your language around your educational master plan, your strategic plan, your technology plan, your human resources plan. There will be actual change in the contents of those things, because those are the things that drive what you do. There will be changes in how you allocate your resources, and there will be a matchup of those allocation of resources with the work in order to deconstruct any racist structures. And if you are doing it that way, in other words, there's an integration throughout the institution, that's different than we do business as usual, and then over here do our diversity effort initiative over here where we, you know, talk about anti-Blackness.
So if I could jump in on this one, and Regina, that response was right on target. And when I think about Mesa College, I think about Compton College as well, and I know you work on your 2030 plan. These planning documents, and I was on a call this morning with a funder with one of these foundations, and they're always looking at our planning documents. And one of the things that I think is very important for community colleges, particularly Mesa and also for Compton College, is to really be looking at our planning documents to ensure that our planning documents include strategies for eliminating racist structures and systems on our campuses, and really talking about how we're going to do this work over a long period of time. Right now in community colleges, what I see happening is that the conversation, and everyone did these resolutions about we want to change this and the other. Now the resolution is nice, but now is the time for the hard work to happen. And so what is that plan for the hard work to happen? And you have a perfect opportunity as you work on these new planning documents to really figure out, okay, this is what we want to be like by 2030, and including these strategies in that plan. And then you can start talking to funders about how do you work that plan. And so I think this is a perfect opportunity for your campus, but also for Compton College, to really be able to work these plans to really fix these structures, which is going to last over the next 6 to 7 to 10 years, rather than looking at this as a one-year struggle. This is going to be hard work and heavy lifting over 7 to 10 to 12 years. And Regina, you're right on target.
Thank you so much. Ahmed, would you like to share?
Yes, ma'am. You wanted me to answer the first question and then the question that's at hand right now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna start with the first question. Of course, I mean, the question that that you asked first. Some of the things that helped me get through when I was at Mesa was, of course, the support of the many of those that's in staff, and then also the fellow students, you know, that were there. But I just wanted to highlight, especially the Black staff and the Black students, because it's something to see those, you know, that's from that same from your community, right? That are doing something that's striving just like you, and those that have made it to a certain level or a certain position, is something to that inspires you and keeps you going. Another thing is the Black study classes that really kept me going as well. You know, just taking English from the Black perspective, history, you know, learning about Black history, taking communication from the Black perspective was something that really helped me on my way, because it's, a lot of the things that you learn, when you're in different classes, your math class or whatever it may be, it's not, it's not just Black students, and you're not learning everything from the black perspective. And just like I was talking about before, in high school and in middle school and all of those other, in those, when you going to those to school and high school and middle school, excuse me, you're not learning about yourself. And just like what Miss Mayasa was talking about, having that self-love, a part of that self-love is learning about yourself, learning about your ancestors and what your ancestors have done, and how they have contributed in history, right? How our voices, when we talk about the English classes, reading books where there's Black authors, right? And our voices is being expressed. Those things aren't in the in middle school. It isn't in high school. So to learn that in college, right, at Mesa, it was just beautiful, right? So that's something that kept me thriving. That's something that kept me inspired. And to have those have students in those classes that look like you, express themselves, right? And and now is the understanding that, wow, I'm not the only one, right? So it's something that kept me going. And then just to see those same students go on and succeed to do different other things, and then also those staff members in the position that they're in, and they're always encouraging. But to the second question, something that came to mind, and I believe that it was mentioned, was the accountability, right? And those that are in a position of power, or that have privilege, they have to recognize that. It can't just be listening and then you just go on and keep on doing the same thing. After you have learned, there must be action, right? So just like when we're in class as students, if whatever we learn, we have to apply to see the results, right? So if I'm in the math class and the professor is teaching me this about math, I have to apply it when the exam comes, or I have to apply it in my life, right? So when those that are privileged, those that are in a position of power, when they hear these things, it can't just fall on deaf ears, right? And no action be followed behind that. There have to be action behind that to really show that you're sincere and that you really do care about about Black voices, care about brown voices, care about those that are oppressed, the voices of the oppressed. You have to really put in the work to really see to really show that you care, right? So I think that is something that's very, very critical, right? When we talk about that, but first it does have to first it has to be learning and knowing about it, because some people are unaware. But after you learn about it, after you've learned so much, you have to put in that work and put in the action to really show that you really have learned something, and that you really do care about those voices that are being expressed.
Thank you. I really, really enjoyed what you shared. And I just wanted to, because of the time, I have to close this out and pass it to our president, Pamela Lester. But I did want to just mention that I like that, even though he shared about his student experience, that in our plan, just as Dr. Curry mentioned and Dr. Stanback-Stroud mentioned, having clear goals clear, SMART goals that we work towards, but then even from a student's perspective, making sure that we weave into that program plan ways that we have culturally responsive or community responsive pedagogy and curriculum that connects with the student experience, right? And so I just wanted to ask, I believe that President Pam will take us from here. And I just want to just thank you all to the panel for being here with us today, for sharing your responses, for answering in the Q&A. And I'm sorry if we didn't get to all of your questions, but I hope they'll come back maybe to visit us again and that we can have this discussion. And I hope that this is the beginning of many other discussions and accountability moving in that direction, making sure that Marathon continues. Thank you.
So thank you so much to our panelists. I am in awe and have listened and learned so much from what I've heard this morning. And Janae, I just want to say thank you so much for moderating today. That was not always easy to do. And so just so appreciate your work. And so to our panelists, thank you so much. Also want you to know that in the midst of this, Dr. Curry also matched your donation to the Constance M. Carroll Humanities Institute, Dr. Stanback-Stroud. So thank you for that. Did
I say 500? I meant 501.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right, great. You know he's going to go 502 on you. So I'll just sit back and watch all of it. So, but I thank you. And to our panelists and you know, Flores, thank you so much for sharing your story and your experiences as a student. And I'm so excited that you are part of our family here at Mesa and bring that wonderful experience to our students every day and the work that you do. Takima and Manuel, thank you so much. Your leadership on this campus makes a difference every single day in the classroom and in other spaces. And I know that you will continue to do that. And to Ahmed, I cannot wait to hear how you do at Cal. We have a lot of students that head to Berkeley, so hoping you can connect with some of them, but very excited for you. That is going to be a fantastic experience for you. And for all of the students that get to be with you in those spaces and the faculty that will undoubtedly learn from your experiences as well. So to our panelists, bravo, thank you so, so much. And we are now going to move on to tell you some of the ways that we're going to be able to continue this work. So if we could go to the next slide, we want to continue this conversation and in a number of ways. We of course have our Mesa Loft online. We have our LEAP program. We have our Mesa College teaching tree. We, of course, the wonderful work that we do in the Committee on Diversity, Action, Inclusion, and Equity under Dr. Judy Sundayos, wonderful leadership over many years. We have just, you know, these wonderful opportunities through our Committee on Student Success and Equity, our Emoja programs, our Black Studies programs, our Chicano Studies programs, our Latinx Alliance. This is not new work to Mesa College. I think the question for us this year is, do we have the structure to push this to the forefront in terms of truly disassembling structural racism at Mesa College? I think that's the question for us right now is, with all of the ways that we've leveraged this work in the past, will there need to be something that sits overarching all of this work so that we actually can do an analysis of where we are and consider the privilege that we bring as educators into this space to make the space different for our students. And so I'm excited to have that discussion. Towards those discussions, I want to let you know that we will be holding, as I said earlier, our community forums twice a month. And our first community forum will be continuing this particular discussion around anti-Blackness, around structural racism, and start to talk about the tangible kinds of ways that our panelists have shared with us today that we can consider moving this work forward. I would encourage our panelists, if you get a minute, to continue to answer questions in the Q&A, that would be awesome, or in the chat. Happy to have you do that as well. So if we could just take a moment to breathe and to thank our panelists, and the work continues.